Hey everyone, you have reached the next step in getting ready for your self-portrait assignment. This is one more practice assignment. I know it probably seems like overkill, but you'll be glad you did all this practice when you're working on a big final copy. So what this is going to do is it's going to give you an opportunity to practice using the Sharpie shading techniques on actual facial features, but a little less pressure than you're doing your big portrait, because again with Sharpie you make a mistake, you're kind of stuck with it. So this is a way to sort of ease your way into that process. It's also giving you a little bit of intro into grid drawing, which some of you have done before, some of you may not. And right now when you do this, I don't want you to worry so much about getting these shapes exact, drawing the facial feature shapes. It is just practice. Really your focus should be on the shading. So do your best with the grid drawing. This is just to get experience, but if the eye looks squintier or wider, don't make a big deal out of it. But I will give some suggestions as I go about how to do this. So like when you're drawing this, the grid is there to help you, so you should use it. So wherever the eye intersects with the grid, I like to make a dot. So that way you're sort of making your own, connect the dots, and you can do all the dots at once or one at a time, but then you just look at where those dots fall on the line. So this isn't quite halfway down, maybe like a third of the way down, and you start transferring those dots. That one's very close to the top, and then this one, again, it's maybe 3/4 over and 1/4 down, and then you can sort of just start to connect them. So your arcs might need some work, but again, I'm not wanting you to get too overwhelmed by the shape of this. So you're just kind of using the grid to help you draw faster, so it's a little less guesswork. So you don't necessarily have to make all the dots, but it is a good tool to sort of get you speeding up. So this part you're doing with a pencil, because you don't really want to see the outlines when you're done. The shape should end because the shading ends, not because there's a big line going around it. And then I want you to, and you can do it over here if you want, you can outline where the shading ends if that helps. So I can take this row of shading and I can outline it to kind of see what it should look like when I'm mapping it out. And again, don't spend too much time on this. I'm probably even spending a little too much time, but I just want to make sure you see the process. Okay? And then, especially with the things like this, pupils, people always tend to think, oh, it's right in the middle, but look at the picture and look where it falls. Okay? So this pupil is really close to the inside corner of the eye. It comes down, it almost gets cut off by the lower lid, comes around, and there's only this little shape left over by the time I finish that circle. Okay? So look for details like this, okay? And the black part, the iris, I don't even know if I'm using the right terms, but the black part is up here. Okay? There is a little highlight. You definitely want to map out your highlights because you don't want to accidentally shade in those areas. Okay? And then there is like a little bit of shading around the whites of the eyes. That's another thing people make. They think the whites of the eyes should be white, but in general there's a lot of shading going on in those areas. Okay? So then you're going to take your Sharpie, and this is where you're really getting your practice. And I always think it's best to start with your blacks or your near blacks, because those you can not be so worried about overdoing, because you need a lot of lines to get to dark. Whereas if you started with a light and you put in too many lines, you've already made a mistake. So you can use whatever technique you want. Right now I'm using hatching. But because I'm doing the dark sections first, I don't have to be too worried about if I'm putting the lines too close together. As a general rule though, you should, so I'm looking for all the darkest areas. As a general rule, you should always make things lighter than you think at first, because with this technique, you just add more dots or more lines to make it darker. So there's no harm in making it too light at first, because you can edit that very easily. Okay, around this, if you can notice, around the edge of this pupil is usually darker, so I'm keeping my lines short just so I stick to the edge of that eye. Okay. And I know my shape on this is off, it's very elongated, but again, that's not what I want you to worry about. Okay, so now if I'm doing the inside of the eye, I want to make sure I spread my lines out a little more. I'm avoiding that highlighted area. I can always add more if it's not dark enough. Okay, and if you're not sure if it's dark enough, then just wait on it. You can always come back to it later. but just start adding in more lines a little bit at a time as needed. Okay, the whites of the eyes do have some shading, so I'm going to throw in some lines here, here, here. Okay. A few shorter lines to get the bottom lid more marked out. Okay, so now going into the shadows, again, I'm looking for the deepest part of the shadows. So I could even go in with my pencil and separate out where I think it's deepest and darkest. Sort of like a little parenthesis there if you need that extra guidance, but if not, just go in, and I like to just build up the darks in that deepest part first. Again, I just add more lines if I think it needs to be darker. I'm trying to keep a steady hand so my lines aren't necessarily having to change direction. You can be pretty sloppy with this and get away with it, but you do want to keep your lines fairly consistent so it's not a big old scribbly mess. You know, I like to have them fill the space whenever possible. And then just add more shorter lines where it needs to be darker in certain areas. Some people are very neat and precise with this. Other people are a little more like me where I'm a little more freeform with it. I don't measure my lines, but I do try to keep them straight and even as much as I can. And a lot of that comes with confidence. If you're slow and shaky, the lines are wiggly. Okay, so you can see the eyes starting to get a little shiny and three-dimensional looking. Always stop and sit back for a second and look at it to see what you might need to adjust. Add more lines to certain areas. Okay. And again, I'm doing cross-hatching, but you can use this opportunity to practice whatever techniques you think you might be interested in. And you don't have to limit yourself to just one. So you can use hatching for the eyes and stippling for the nose or whatever suits you. Okay? So there's one area. You can always go back and refine it. It's not necessarily done, but I do just want to walk you through each one a little bit. Okay, next is the nose. People always overthink noses. Really, it's nostrils surrounded by parentheses. So you have circles or ovals, parentheses on either side, and then depending on where your light source comes from, one side of the nose, it's like a cone. One side is dark, one side is lighter. So again, you can use this grid, so a little more than halfway down. We have a couple nostrils here. And again, the shape doesn't matter so much. You should probably have at least the distance of the width of the nostrils between them, so they're not too close or too far apart. And then you're looking for these little parentheses. See, I made mine a little low, but I'm not going to worry about that right now. Okay, and then the shading here comes up around here, dips down and up. So I can give myself a little guideline here about where that should come up. And then once I have the height, it starts to arc out. Okay, this medium value is sort of like a triangle. Okay, and the shading kind of arcs down. It's sort of a diagonal line almost all the way to the edge here. Okay, and then here we have a little bit of a triangle for that Cupid's bow, I think it's called, and the lip, that little divot that everyone has here. So we have that triangle there. That kind of comes up to connect with that. Again, don't panic about this being perfect. We're just marking out where we see shading happening. Okay, and you can notice here, like this is really dark, this is really dark, in between here is really light. So if you wanted to mark that out so you don't accidentally shade in there, that's always a good idea to mark out where your highlights are. You don't want to put any shading where you don't need to. And then there's a bubble of shading over here. Okay. And again, start with your dark areas. If it's black, you really can't mess it up as long as you're staying inside the shapes you mapped out. Oh, I should do different techniques. Maybe I'll do stippling this time. With stippling, you can switch to a regular fine tip Sharpie because otherwise it would take you absolutely forever with an ultra fine. This won't take me too long. I might not get it as dark as you need to, but So I'm going darkest right down this line. And I'm just making sure it stays pretty dark all the way around here. That's the good thing about stippling, is that it takes a long time to really make a big mistake, so if you have the patience for it, it's a little more foolproof, because it takes a long time to make something too dark. So you have to really not be paying attention. Okay, so it does start to lighten up here, so I am going to just start spreading them out more. You can always add more if it's too light. Before I come down too much, I am going to jump and get my other darks in. So this is really dark. Okay, so it's starting to get some form here. Watching out for the area where there is a little bit of lighter shading. Okay, areas where I know it's like all medium, I kind of start by filling it in with something that's a light to medium. And I always sit back, I look at it, you know, I decide like this is really dark coming off of here. So focus on the areas that I see need more work. I can always go back to any part later, so I don't really make it a big deal to finish one area if I want to kind of jump around and let the whole thing develop little by little. Okay, here there is shading, but it is pretty light, so start lighter than you think you need to. And you're trying to keep the area consistent, unless there are some fades going on. You're trying to stay a consistent value, so you don't want them really far apart here and then tight down here if this whole area is supposed to be the same. So make sure you are stopping, jumping around, looking. Okay, all around here is kind of a medium. Okay, across this is really tight and dark. Some people just like to take it and draw a line, but then those lines really stand out. You want this whole thing to look really soft and nice. So, okay, once you have everything in, then you're just sort of looking and saying what needs more. This I need some shading, and it is a highlighted area, but it's not 100% highlight. It's just a lighter value. It's a lot of stopping, sitting back, and asking yourself what needs more, or what needs to be faded. You know, does that need to gradually fade out? Okay. Alright, so there's the nose. Definitely not perfect and something I would continue to work on, but you get the idea, I hope. Okay, that's a little crooked. You guys can take your time more than I am. I'm just trying to show you. Okay, so nose, again, don't overthink it. And finally the mouth. Okay, same idea. You might want to map out where things intersect. Some general rules about a mouth, just in case you're curious. Top lip usually tends to be darker. This dip can really vary a lot from person to person. So some people have a really sharp dip, some people barely have one. Some people's top lips are barely visible. So when you can't see, maybe if on your picture your top lip even existing, that's not abnormal. It could just be the picture. But lips are quite varied from person to person. Okay, especially if they're open, closed, smiling, like that changes the shape a lot. So, okay, and then there's usually these shadows from where the lips kind of pucker into the cheeks. So that is an important feature. Again, a lot of people tend to overlook it. And then the shading above and below makes a big difference for making things look three-dimensional. And again, this is for that Cupid's bow feature that we tend to have. Okay, some shading down here, some shading Down here, there's almost always, depending on the lighting, but almost always a shadow underneath your upper lip because it does stick out and lighting tends to be from above, so you should always have a shadow of some sort down here. And then again, map out where your highlights fall. Bottom lip is also sort of like a cylinder, where it's got this kind of round highlight from where it sticks out the most. Top lip might have a highlight where your kind of crest bows in there. But you can see here I have medium, dark, light, dark. So you might want to almost stripe it out. Medium, dark, light, dark. And you can even label them if you want. Okay, maybe I'll do this one with just hatching, just to give you guys. And hatching can go in whatever direction you want. I tend to be more comfortable with diagonal lines for whatever reason. I feel like if I try to go straight, they end up being crooked anyways, so I make them diagonal on purpose. And you can change, you can keep them all the same direction. Or you can change direction, that's really up to you. Okay, there's a little shading around the edge, that's sort of like your outline shading that you're doing. Much tighter together. Remember, you can always add more lines, but you can't take them away. Some sort of spreading out here. Shorter lines for if you want like almost like a dark outline, just keep those lines close together and short. A little longer and more spread out there. I have a hard time sometimes with hatching. I just want to change direction, so I end up starting with the intention of doing hatching, and I end up cross hatching, which is fine. I don't really make a lot of rules about that. As long as it comes out with the values accurate, that's more important than if you were able to stick with one technique or not. I don't care about that. So it's starting to get some roundness. You know, comparing this to that, I need more darkness here, so I'm just going to add in a few more lines. I'll make this darker up here. Top lip usually tends to be darker because it's kind of bending away from the top light, kind of bends in. And then between the lips, where the lips come together, that typically tends to be a fairly dark line. So if something doesn't look right, check those kind of rules that I'm explaining. So if something doesn't look right, check to see if your top lip is looking darker than your bottom lip. Check to make sure you have a highlight that runs the course of the bottom lip. And again, depending on your lighting and the shape of your lips, those things may not be true, but they are pretty consistent across the board. Things to look for. Okay, so all three of these could be worked on, but I think hopefully you get the idea. You can always go back and add more dots, add more lines, but this should at least give you practice of what the shading feels like inside of a face and how they should blend out and how to build them up a little at a time and gradually. I could keep doing this forever, but I will stop the video now because I think you got the idea. Saying that and then I keep trying. But that's what you should do. Just keep looking. Don't just get frustrated and say it doesn't look right. Always look at it and say, why doesn't it look right? Figure out the difference between the picture and your drawing and just make adjustments. And when in doubt, please ask questions so I can help you. Turning in cross hatching. Okay. Good luck. This will be counted as a sketch grade. You do need to turn it in. So do your best. Try not to start over. Just try to make work what you did. It's better to identify your mistake and just move on. and learn from it rather than start over a million times and never finish anything.